The essence of legal sanity is a 6-step process of lawyering. And this 6-step process works whether you're doing a transaction or a dispute. First step is that to understand what is it that the client really wants. A client will come in a situation and they will say, I want to destroy that person in litigation. I want to sell my business. I want to buy this person's business. They come in oftentimes confused, and oftentimes they come in very clear on what they think they want. And what I've learned as a lawyer is that what people say they want and what they really want are often two different things. Sometimes the difference between what they say they want and what they really want is a slight difference, and sometimes it's very significant. But even where it's a slight difference, when you begin in a legal process, it's like using a telescope to look at the sky. You could point the telescope up to a certain point in the sky. If you move that slightly, it just seems like it's off just a little bit, but when you connect those 2 points in the sky, they're light years apart. It's the same thing in a legal situation. So it's very, very important for a client to understand exactly what it is they want, because at the end of the day, if they're not satisfied with what they have, they're not going to be satisfied with the process. They're not going to be thrilled with you. You're not going to feel like the sense of that you really did something that was valuable. You're not going to feel really appreciated, which is going to take a hit on your self-esteem. It's going to deplete you a little bit. You're not going to feel great about what you're doing as a lawyer. And they're not going to be thrilled with you. And one of the ways to generate business, which we'll talk about a little bit later, is to have your clients become what's called client evangelists, where they're so thrilled with you that they're praising you to other people. Not just that they're satisfied they pay the bill. That's basic. So how do they like you so much that they're going out there and they're telling other people how fantastic you are? So on this point, on what it is that clients want, this is the metaphor that I use when I do these training programs for other lawyers. Going down a legal road and helping someone with a legal problem is like helping your client put a 40-foot ladder up against the wall. And at the top of that ladder, there's a box. And inside that box is the results the client says they want. And a skilled lawyer will take their client step by step by step by step and help them up that ladder. Sometimes the lawyer's taking the lead and pulling them along. Sometimes the lawyer's pushing. Different dynamic, but you finally get up to the top. And that could be 3 weeks later, it could be 10 years later in some protracted disputes. And you finally get up there and you open up that box and the client opens it up and they get there and they realize more often than not, what they open up in that box, they no longer want it. So an old saying, be careful what you ask for because you may get it. It's just the nature of human nature is that sometimes we ask for things that we want now, but when we actually get it, it's not really something that was as fulfilling for us as we thought it would be. And to me, that's a disaster. Because the client has spent all this time and money to get up to that box, and now what? Now they're not satisfied. And now you've helped them get a result that's not really changing anything in their life. To me, a lawyer would be well served to take a step back at the beginning of the process to make sure that the ladder is leaning on the right wall. And sometimes you need a 10-foot ladder because it's on a different wall than you need a 40-foot ladder on a wall that's going to get you results that you don't want. That's the first step. The second step in the legal sanity process is understanding that the biggest obstacle to getting what we want in our lives, and this applies for clients, it's not the judge, not the jury, not the other people, not the leverage you have. All those are important, no doubt about it. But the biggest obstacle to getting what we want is ourselves. And once a client realizes that they themselves have a role in their success or failure, a central role in their success or failure, it's very, very helpful because it's the way to get to we talked about getting an efficient result. So how do you get efficient result? You find out what are the most significant factors in determining success in a legal situation. So for example, if someone's negotiating a transaction and they want to get the best price possible, but they're conflict avoider, and the person on the other end is much more aggressive, then you'll end up leaving way too much money on the table. You'll either pay too much, you'll get back too little, depending on what your circumstances. So understanding how you show up is very important. Likewise, if someone's in a dispute and they're overly aggressive, sometimes they'll spend way too much time fighting to prove a point, when at the end of the day, they end up with much worse results. So for example, let's say someone has a dispute and they owe someone $40,000. And even though they feel strongly they shouldn't have to pay the $40,000. You could settle that case early on for $10,000 and have a legal fee of $10,000, like say $5,000. The whole thing will cost them $15,000. Instead, such a person will fight. They'll end up spending $150,000 on legal fees. And even though they may not have to pay anything on the $40,000, it still costs them more money in legal fees. So you want to take a practical approach. You want to see what's in my best business interest, not let your emotions run the gamut. So as a lawyer, you really want to help people get out of their own way. And that's very important. Most lawyers don't do that. Most lawyers see a client who's emotionally charged up, they want to fight, they jump on the bandwagon, they throw some fuel on the fire, because that's how a lawyer could end up making a lot more money. And they may not even be doing it for such nefarious purposes. The lawyer may just not even be aware of this dynamic, and they're just telling the client what they want to hear, not necessarily what they need to hear. The third step in legal sanity is understanding what are the external obstacles. In steps 1 and 2, we understood the internal obstacles. What is it that I really want? And how do I get in my own way? Steps 1 and 2. Step 3 is we now look at the external obstacles. What's my leverage? What is the law state? What are my rights here? How do I understand where I stand? What's the other person's personality like? What's my best way to approach it? Understanding this whole landscape is your due diligence. And what happens is that most people in a legal situation, particularly in a dispute or a negotiation, are shooting from the hip. They don't think through all these different factors. So they'll reach out to someone by email when maybe the better thing to do is a phone call. Sometimes the lawyer will reach out to the other lawyer, but maybe a client-to-client interaction was better. This needs to be given thought. And this really merges into the fourth step, which is to come up with a game plan. In football, in sports, in life, in military, there has to be a game plan. What's your game plan? How are you going to actually, so now you know what your goal is. You've now gone through the ways in which you get in your own way and how you're not going to be your own obstacle. You now understand what the landscape is and what your different challenges are. So now how are you going to approach all that? You have to come up with a game plan. So instead of shooting from the hip, you think it through. In chess, someone who's a very basic chess player will look at the board, make a move, and they won't even think ahead one move, or they'll think ahead one move ahead. Okay, if I move the piece here, then the person's going to take me, so I won't move there, and then they move to a different place. The grandmaster will think 10 moves ahead. They'll be able to see what's going on. They'll be able to anticipate what's taking place. So likewise, if you have a significant legal challenge, whether it's a dispute or a transaction you're trying to negotiate, really, and even a business, to make sure you're getting set on the right course. What is the game plan? How are you going to go about protecting your rights? How are you going to go about securing what it is that you need? And to be able to think this through is vital. And as part of the game plan, you also want to role play it, particularly if it's a negotiation. You want to practice and anticipate what the other side is going to do and be prepared for that. So I find that this is tremendously lacking in a legal situation. And in the sports world, you would never do that. You would never, in sports, you prepare for a team as you prepare for the next game. You're anticipating what they're going to do. The offense plays against the defense. They run through all these different scenarios of how to manage what they're expecting. And of course, with the game plan doesn't mean you're wedded to the game plan. There has to be flexibility and openness, but at least you're prepared. The fifth step is the actual implementation. Now this is where most people begin. Most people begin with the implementation. That's the shooting from the hip. They haven't thought about steps 1 through 4, or they've just done so in a very cursory way. So when you're going forward with, now it's time to implement it. How do you implement it? You have to keep in mind, what's my goal? What's my obstacles? How do you keep reminding yourself so that you're able to implement effectively on the game plan that you've charted out? And in that process of the implementation, you may have to go back. It's not necessarily steps going up a ladder, or that works, but it's also a circle. At any point, you can go back to the other points. It's very, very important to be constantly adaptive, and changing, and taking in new information, and measuring it up to your game plan, and deciding where you need to make changes and adjustments in life. And then the last step is, once it's been implemented, once you have the result that you need to have what's called closure, which is step 6. There's three different aspects of closure. One is you have to have legal, you have to have business closure to make sure that you have the business points that are all agreed to. So you can have an agreement with someone, you think you have an agreement with them, and the person says, okay, I'm gonna help you create a promotional video for your business. And it's going to cost $1,000 to do that video. And you say, great, let's do it. You shake hands, you pick the time and the location. And then you go ahead and do the video. And then the person delivers the video to you 3 weeks later and you don't pay them. The person says, well, you have to pay me. Well, I know I have to pay you, but we never decided when I had to pay you. So you both had an agreement, but you had one understanding, the other person had the other understanding. So a true agreement, there has to be a meeting of the minds on all the central points. So a lot of times people will rush to think they have a resolution when in truth it's not yet finalized yet. They haven't worked through all the different details. So that's important. Two, the legal closures to make sure everything is properly documented up and protected. And then the third is interpersonal closure to make sure that you feel good with the other person. If there's any hard feelings in the process of the negotiation, to clear that to the extent that it's possible. And for you to take your own lessons. What did I learn? How did I grow from this situation? How am I going to do things differently? So you use the whole legal process to help advance your life. And you grow through every single situation that comes your way.